Hi, I'm Raquel Pelzel, the editorial director of cookbooks for Clarkson Potter. I've been an editor at Potter for going on 5 years. I edit culinary icons like Ina Garten and Giada De Laurentiis, and also incredibly talented rising stars like Claire Saffitz, and now Eric Kim. And I'm so excited to be introducing Eric and his new cookbook that is coming out called Korean American. Yay. It's been such a journey to get here, right?
It's been a big journey. This is our first press thing. I'm really excited about this. So I'm a cooking columnist at the New York Times and the author of Korean American. I'm so excited to talk about this with you guys today.
Well, Eric, when I think about your cookbook, when I think about the first time we met for coffee, and you were a columnist for Food 52, and I was always so taken by your columns. They're so vulnerable and so poignant, and your recipes always sounded so delicious. And so I was super excited to meet with you and talk about potential cookbook ideas. And I didn't know what kind of cookbook you'd be writing or what you wanted to write. So why don't you tell everyone a little bit about Korean American and then what inspired you down this path? Because Korean American is not a typical cookbook. I think it's very unique and it's very personal to you and who you are. And I think the recipes feel very, very special.
Thank you so much. I remember that breakfast so much. That's the day everything changed for me, not to be dramatic, but it's funny because I actually made an old Food 52 recipe of mine this morning. These cottage cheese pancakes. They're so good because they only make 4 pancakes, and sometimes that's all you need, But I think about my time there and all the columns I wrote, all the recipes I developed, and I feel like there was this itch I had. I was trying to scratch, which was writing about Korean food, which is a challenge for someone who grew up in America or who didn't always cook Korean food. I started off as a cook of just American food, general cooking, because my mom cooked the Korean food, and for years I was like, why would I try when her food is already here? But I think I wrote some pieces at 52 that resonated with people, and they were always I can't talk about my mom without wanting to cry, but I think these pieces had my mom as a central figure, and I found that writing essays about her and our cooking and cooking together and the way she cooks, it was sort of practice for this book, I think. And I think it was really exciting once I started this book, I realized, oh, this is kind of an extension of those essays. The very first one was called, what is it called? It's called When I Came Out to My Parents, Kimchi Fried Rice Held Us Together. It was sort of this essay about my coming out to my mother and how sorry, how food was, so yeah, I'm gonna cry a lot throughout this. How food was a very kind of unifying thing for our family to gather around. And I've always felt this about food writing. I started off as an academic. I was a PhD in literature and dropped out halfway through. But the one thing that I really loved about food versus literary criticism, for instance, was that through food, I was able to explore not just my family history, but also the context of American immigration, specifically Korean immigration. And in my book, it's very specifically about Atlanta. And so I found that through food, I was able
You're from, it's where your family is.
Yeah, from Atlanta, born and raised, everyone's still there. And I found that food was a great way to just tell a story. So,
and I think, your cookbook, of course, is packed with incredible, amazing recipes, similar to the recipes that go viral and people go crazy for in the New York Times. But you also have these just beautifully poignant moments throughout the book where you're writing about different topics, everything from Thanksgiving to leaving home and coming back again. And I think there's all of these spots in the book where we see insight into who you are as a person, and as someone who is Korean and someone who is American. And I think that's such a beautiful theme in the book. And I'd be curious to hear from you what surprised you most when you started this journey, writing this cookbook. What was kind of unexpected? I mean, I know, and I'm sure everyone would love to hear the process of writing and how, you were home and it was the pandemic and what a time to be writing a cookbook, but how that was kind of special for you too. So can you kind of speak to that?
Yeah, for sure. I think what's really special about the book is it kind of documents this very pivotal moment in my life, in all of our lives. But I got the book deal like as soon as we went into lockdown in New York. So it was a time in my life when I was thinking about family a lot. And I think, sorry.
Okay.
I think for me, I started writing the book thinking that it was going to be a reported kind of situation where I'm really documenting my mother's recipes only, because as someone who, even as someone who came out of like food media and was a cook and was developing recipes, I didn't feel like I was able to lay claim to Korean cooking. And like, who was I to write about Korean food? And there is this sense also in this space where Korean Americans are often, trying to protect the cuisine too from too much innovation. And so there's conversations of authenticity come up all the time, like who is allowed to cook Korean food. And as I started writing this book, all the recipes that my mother created were so wonderful, and they're in the book. But I think what I realized was the story really lied in how I interpreted them and how I wrote them down. And so it's like this, the book is about the translation process. There's a section in the book, I wish I could just like turn to there's a section in the book called The Tiger in the Hand. And I called it that because it's where I introduced my mother. Because my mom is the tiger. There are plenty of like cliches and tropes about tiger moms in Asian culture, but I was like referring to it as like, when a ringleader like puts the hand into the tiger's mouth, like that's sort of what it's like to get a recipe out of my mother. Very difficult. And so what I realized though was the hand is like just as important, like the translator, the writer. And so I sort of really, as a writer, I've always held the written word to such a high regard, and I really respect it and think it's so important, and one major way to immortalize culture, history, personal history, and cuisine. And so as I started writing the book, I started to gain some confidence. I learned a lot about Korean food and Korean cooking and started to have opinions about it. And I found that the story wasn't just about my mom, it was really about our relationship. So I think, sorry, I think once I realized that I was documenting not just my mother, but also like myself and also, Korean Americans in general, it became a much bigger project for me and a little more stressful to write, and a lot of pressure to get it right. Because it's called Korean American, it's like, I really want to make Korean Americans proud of seeing this book. And one important thing about the book though that I'm really proud of that I stuck with was making sure that my eyes weren't in it at all. It's a very like weird specific ask. My photographer really wanted like pictures of my face in there, but I was like, I want to be the writer. And I've always felt this about great first person writing. The best memoir writing to me is the kind where the reader gets to kind of get lost in it, and not like almost, it's written in a way, even though it's in the first person, it's written in a way that it's so universal that it makes the reader feel like they are the narrator. And I think that's great when the writer disappears, and hopefully I did that.
I was going to say the exact same thing. Like, even though this book, the essays and the narrative is so uniquely personal to you and your story and your experience, the way in which it's written and the topics that you speak to are so universal. These feelings of home and nostalgia and tradition and fitting in and not fitting in and creating your own path and, going against what's expected. And I'm getting goosebumps just talking about it. Like, I think I think it's part of what's so special about your writing is that while you're speaking about your experience, you have this beautiful way of kind of extending your hand outside of the book and across the page to the reader and inviting them in, and also kind of wrapping them up in your arms and making them feel like they're in your story, but it's also an exploration of their own story in a way. You spoke about Jenny, your photographer, who was an incredible partner in this. And I think that's something else that makes the book so very special is the photo program. The art program is just stunning and so unique. Tell me a little bit, you worked so closely with Jenny. So why don't you share a little bit about that experience and how she took from your words and text and how she brought your words to life through images?
Yeah, man, Jenny Huang, she's incredible. I met her at Food 52. She shot a few of my columns, and then we kind of quickly became friends because I just loved her photography. She has this like precision and this clarity in the images themselves, like thematically, but also literally, like it's very like fine-tuned and you can see texture really well. And they look like Vermeer paintings to me, and Vermeer happens to be my favorite painter. So I thought that he's like hanging on my wall right there. Anyway, not the actual Vermeer, but
maybe one day.
One day. But I think I knew that this was a storytelling book, and I wanted it to look different and to feel fresh and new. And because one thing about writing a book that maybe hasn't existed in its form yet, like a book like this, the art has to look different because I just didn't feel that the regular type of food photography that's often in cookbooks like would fit this kind of narrative storytelling. And so she had such a vision for it and such strong opinions that I liked working with her on this because I kind of like really felt like I could let her do her thing because she was if I was the storyteller via words, she was storytelling via the photos, and I knew I could like trust her with that. So there's some really lovely moments in here, and I also think people will enjoy seeing, especially Korean people, will really enjoy seeing their cuisine presented in such a like artful way. It's I'm really these photos, like I almost don't feel like I can lay claim to them. They're hers. They're really good.
I think they're yours. I think you both created them beautifully together.
Also, Beatrice Shaska and Tina Hong, the prop stylist and the food stylist, they really,
their work is just incredible, stunning.
Filled out the world. And it was actually really important to me to have an Asian photographer and an Asian food stylist because I really wanted the food to be represented in a way that wasn't where like I think what tends to happen in food media is that people come in with their preconceptions about what a dish should be. And with Korean cuisine and Korean cooking, as I learned like while developing the book, the rules are not the same. There's no sprinkle of parsley on that brown stew. It's just brown, and it should be brown because it's a very classic dish that like millions of people eat every day. So there's like stuff like that that's just really important to me. And yeah, I could go on forever about them, but I won't.
Staying true to what it's supposed to be. I love that. In closing, I wanted to ask you, I don't think it's any secret, anyone who follows you on any of your social feeds, that you are a big Nigella Lawson fan. So when starting to write your own cookbook, when starting to, think about your cookbook, who are your biggest inspirations, whether it's, cookbook authors or food writers or people outside of the food world, since you are, you are such a wonderful writer and you've studied literature and writing, who did you pull inspiration from and how did that influence the book?
Oh man, from so many people. Nigella was definitely the first. There are moments where we had to like take her out because it was like, this is not the Nigella book. It's like the Eric and Jane book. Jane is my mother's name. So the way Nigella writes about context and history in her head notes was really influential for me, and just her prose style. I really borrow a lot from it. But additionally, I would say I really love today's essayists like Gia Tolentino, and Brian Washington is a novelist, but he also writes lovely essays. I think I borrowed from contemporary writers today who are colleagues and friends, and I think they're just they write about this stuff in a fresh way, and I think that's what's really exciting about writing. It's always changing, and a lot of my influences are old. Like this entire shelf is like 19th and 20th century American literature, but I really also love the innovations that new writers are doing, and especially in regard to food. Like food is a very sort of like food writing has advanced, I think, and you should find it beyond food media now. I think that's the best food writing in my opinion. Yeah.
I love that. I love that you pull inspiration from all sources. You're a writer's writer, and I have to say an editor's dream.
Oh, good.
Well, you're always striving to make something perfect, to have the perfect, nuance and rhythm and tone. And, I appreciate that because, of course, your recipes, when approaching recipes, you strive for that balance as well in flavor, and you strive for balance in your writing as well. So I think there's lots of ways to dive into your book, whether you want something to read next to your bed or whether you're bringing it into the kitchen to be inspired and, find some new go-to recipes. Thank you, Eric. I'm so excited for your book to be into the world. I can't wait to hold a copy in my hands. I'm so proud of your book and of you. And, it's always such a joy to talk to you.
Such a journey.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone.
Hi, I'm Rick Martinez, and I am so excited to be speaking with you today. I love what you do. Librarians across America are educating our children and keeping everyone abreast of amazing new titles. I'm super excited to share with you my little baby, Mi Cocina. This book has been a true labor of love. I have been working on this book for 2 years now, and it is something that I absolutely love. It is my go-to book here in the kitchen. All of my favorite foods from around Mexico are in this book, and I'm really excited to share it with you today. This book is organized by regions. I wanted to create a regional cookbook. I know Americans love Mexican food, but have a very sort of narrow view of what Mexican food actually is. And the reality is this country is so huge. Mexico is so diverse, both in geography and in agriculture and in climate. And so regional Mexican cuisine is so very different, so very diverse. And I wanted to share that. I wanted to expand the repertoire of what Mexican food is. Because it's a regional cookbook, I wanted to call out each of the regions. So it's broken out into 8 chapters. The first chapter is all about the basics, and these are the staples of Mexican cuisine, which exist across the country. So in this chapter, you'll find tortillas, both wheat and corn, and a lot of other corn products like sopes and gorditas and tamales. You'll find rice and beans, so frijoles de olla, frijoles refritos, arroz blanco, rojo, y verde. You'll also find all of the salsas. And I've included, because I get asked so frequently about, I'm trying to up my salsa game, I decided to just go in and put 16 salsa recipes in the book because they're important and there are so many regional variations, and there's so many ways to be creative when you make salsas. So I wanted people to feel like they could open up and explore different ingredients using fruits and oils as opposed to simply tomatoes and tomatillos. In the regional chapters, there are 7 regions that I explored. I bought a car in Mexico City. I drove around the country, visited all states, 156 cities, over 20,000 miles. And I broke out the regions into the central region, which is very European, Spanish and French, Oaxaca, which is very indigenous, Yucatan, which is bright and grows a lot of acidic citrus fruits, and also the habanero. And then the Gulf Coast, which is heavily influenced by Afro-Caribbean and Cuban the northern states, which are desert, but also cattle ranchers, the western states, the central Pacific coast, which is dominated by seafood, Baja, which has a very Mediterranean climate. And all of these regions produce so much incredible food, each one so incredibly different and diverse. And that is what I want to do: expand the palette, expand the repertoire of all of the readers, and so that you'll have a better understanding of what Mexican food is and the diversity exists in this country. My parents and I grew up in Texas. We were born in Austin, Texas. And I think for me personally, I grew up believing that we were the embodiment of Mexicans and Mexico, not because that's how we identified ourselves, but because that's how other people identified us. We were the Mexican family in an all-white neighborhood. We were the ones that cooked Mexican food. We ate Mexican food. And I think the reality is that we ate Tex-Mex food that is influenced by the northern states of Mexico. But at that time, I didn't know that. I just thought we were a very atypical Mexican family. And that was part of a desire to understand my place, my family's place, where we came from, where our food came from. I don't think when I wrote the proposal for this book that I really truly understood how big a part of, or how big a desire that was to understand when I did the research. When I wrote the proposal for the book, I wanted to create a regional Mexican cookbook because I wanted to present the diversity of Mexican cuisine to an American audience. But as I started to travel, I realized that actually part of this journey, a big part of this journey, was really trying to understand where I came from. And, you know, years ago, I had gone to a beach town called Barrio de Navidad. And I was in my 20s and I met a group of 20-something Mexican travelers. And we were hanging out, we were drinking on the beach. And one of them said to me, "You look like you come from Michoacan." And I didn't really understand what that meant. I didn't know if that was good or bad. I mean, imagine if someone said to you, "You look like you're from Iowa." Like, I don't know what that means. I don't know what he was trying to say. But it stuck with me. And I had always wanted to go to Michoacan, a state in the west central part of the country, to understand, like, to see what people look like, to see if I felt like I fit in. And I think that was a big part of this journey as well, in addition to trying to find, you know, the origin of my family and their cuisine, but also just understanding where my place is in Mexico. My family, my mother's side of the family, have very distinct features, which I took. So darker complexion, higher cheekbones, the shape of our eyes. My father's side of the family has much lighter skin, lighter hair, a very different body type than I do, or than I have. And, you know, and I wanted to find out where both sides of my family came from. And so when I started out the journey, I got to Michoacan. I didn't find people that looked like me. I didn't identify as much as I wanted to. I didn't feel that connection to place. I didn't feel the connection to the food or to the culture. It wasn't until I got into the northern states, Monterrey and Torreon, two cities in northern Mexico, that I actually started to identify more closely with the people in the cuisine. When I got close to Monterrey, which is where my paternal grandmother is from, I saw food that started to look a little bit more like what I was used to. And there was a small town outside of Monterrey that I stopped to have lunch in, and the plate that landed in front of me looked as though my grandmother had made it. Like, literally every single component on the plate. The guiso, which was a red chili and pork based stew, the red rice, the flour tortillas, all of it just, I mean, it was literally like I was, 5 years old and I walked into my grandmother's kitchen and she put this plate in front of me. And that was definitely a connection to the food. And it made sense because people from Monterrey migrated northward across the Texas border and into central Texas and heavily influenced the Tex-Mex cuisine that developed over the next 100 years. And as I moved a little bit further west, I got closer to Torreon, which is where my maternal grandfather was born. People started to look like me. I stopped in a town called Saltillo, and I was in one of the plazas, and there was a little girl. She was probably about 3 years old. She was wearing a cute little dress with her mother and father. She had these black Mary Janes on, which she loved, and she was dancing in the plaza. And it was the most adorable thing I'd seen. And then she stopped to look at me. And when she looked at me, she looked almost exactly like this photo of my mother when she was about the same age. And I was just so taken aback. To that point, I had not seen anyone that had similar features to my mother's side of the family or to me. And at that moment, I realized that this was the place where my Castrita side of the family came from. And as I walked through this town, it was like walking through, a huge Mexican wedding. Like everyone looked familiar, even though I couldn't remember anybody's names. But I just felt like I was surrounded by family. And that was something that hadn't happened, at that point, 9 months into my trip around Mexico. And that was the first time I felt that deep connection to family and to people. But I didn't really connect to the place. It wasn't until I got into Mazatlan, which is a coastal town on the Pacific side, that I really felt really comfortable. It's a beautiful city. The people are so incredibly friendly. It's also where I quarantined. And I was in an Airbnb by myself for about 3 months. And I started developing the recipes for this book there. And every morning I would wake up and I would walk to the mercado and buy all the food that I needed to prepare the recipes that I was cooking that day. And I would pass by this house, which was for sale. And, I'd never in a million years thought that I would buy a house during a pandemic and leave my apartment in New York and move to Mexico. But over the course of the 4 months, after having lived here, after having experienced the culture and the cuisine, living in a place where it's summer year round, where there are coconut trees and mango trees and tomatoes are always in season. And, there's so much agriculture around this particular city that the produce and the animals travel maybe about 15 to 20 miles to get to the market. So everything is picked when it's ripe and fresh. The food is so incredible here. The shrimp boats come in every morning at 6:30 a.m. So it's almost impossible to get bad seafood. It's just a culinary paradise for me. Also, it's like incredibly beautiful. This is where I wanted to be. This is where I had that deep connection that I really longed for. And so now I bought this house. I found a dog on Christmas Eve last year and adopted him. And now he's my best friend. And luckily for me, I get to write and cook and shoot and record podcasts from my house in Mexico. And that is part of the experience of Mi Cocina. That is what I wanted to share with you and also my readers. This is a very personal book to me. It's my love letter to the country of Mexico, the people, the food, and the cuisine of Mexico. And that's what I want to share with you.
Hi, I'm Ann Barton, an editor with DK, and I'm here with Tanorria Askew, author of the cookbook Staples Plus 5. Tanorria, you and I were connected by our mutual friend and colleague, Ashley Brooks. And when Ashley brought you to my attention, I was immediately taken with your warmth and enthusiasm, and of course, your amazing food, as well as the fact that you started your career in a totally different industry before qualifying for MasterChef and then building your own personal chef business. Can you talk a little bit about that journey?
Sure. I spent 15 years at a credit union, and I worked in all facets of it, the sales side and human resources, diversity and inclusion. I just knew I didn't want to do it forever. And my friends would constantly encourage me to cook for a living. I would have them over and feed them, and they're like, you should do this. And I decided to finally chase my wild and crazy dreams and audition for MasterChef. And 2 months after coming home from filming the show, I quit my full-time job, and I have been helping people create delicious memories ever since.
So cool. We started talking about the idea for a cookbook in mid 2020. So it was a few months into the pandemic, and there was a real desire for nourishment and comfort, as well as a practical need to just make use of pantry staples like dry goods and beans. You want to talk a little bit about how that informed the premise of Staples Plus 5, and kind of the idea behind the book?
You know, I have been cooking with pantry staples ever since I started learning how to cook at 6 years old. It's what my mom did. It's what my grandma did. I always watched them pull out a bag of flour or beans or rice or, canned tomatoes and make a meal. And so with the pandemic in place and knowing how to cook from staples, and also my time on MasterChef and knowing that we always had this little staple pantry at our cook station, even if we didn't know what was under that mystery box, we knew we had that pantry. All of those things put together, I thought, okay, everyone should be able to know how to do this. At the beginning of the pandemic, when the grocery store shelves were empty, I wasn't worried. I knew that I could make, wholesome meals with the things in my pantry.
Yeah. And so that's what we did for the book. You came up with a list of 35 pantry staples, and all of the recipes are based on those staples and then feature up to an additional 5 ingredients. So things like fresh produce and herbs would be additional ingredients. I know you had a hard time narrowing down your staples list. We went back and forth on that a lot. What other parts of the cookbook process were challenging?
Oh gosh, what else was challenging about the cookbook process? I would say keeping my stories to a minimum, because I love telling all of the stories. And also I write recipes and I talk how I just kind of flow in the kitchen. So making sure that this recipe spoke to everyone, that everyone can read this recipe and say, yes, I could do this too. I don't know if I would have been able to do that without you.
Well, I think we came up with a really great balance of your voice along with a really clear, concise recipe that anyone can cook from. What did you find most rewarding about the process, or the most fun?
Yeah. Oh gosh. Honestly, just the fact that I have this in my hands and I can look at it and say, I did this, is absolutely wild to me. But also being present. I'm so grateful that DK has offices here in Indianapolis, where I'm from. So being able to be present for the food shoot and working with Ashley and working with you in person during a pandemic was, I was really fortunate to have that experience. And so seeing the behind the scenes of the cookbook process is really cool.
Yeah, it was so much fun, and we ate so much good food on that shoot. One of the things that I really love about this book is the way you draw on your family history. And you kind of mentioned before the influence your family had on your cooking. Many of the recipes in the book are inspired by things that your parents or grandparents made. Do you want to talk a little bit more just about the role that food played in your family growing up and how it influenced how you cook?
Sure. I tend to say that I come from the culinary institute of my parents and grandparents. I learned everything about cooking and really what food can do and how it builds community through my parents. Being that we moved here from Tennessee when I was young, we were a transplant family with no other family here, and they constantly invited people into our homes to get to know them. And I realized, oh, I can make friends by feeding people. And so I think that's really what drove my interest in cooking, was building community through food. And I watched my parents and my grandparents do that. And that's what I really hope that Staples Plus 5 does for other people.
I think it really comes through in the recipes, just that love and that caring and community feeling. I'm sure it's hard to choose, but do you have a favorite family recipe in the book?
Oh, hands down, it would be the sweet potato pie bars. My grandmother, I say every time I'm making a sweet potato pie, she's standing in the kitchen with me. I can just feel her presence. And so to pay homage to her with a spin of a sweet potato pie that I can call my own, but is just honoring her, is really, really special.
Well, I can personally attest to how delicious those bars are. I think they were one of the first things to disappear when we had the shoot. They are fantastic. So you were on MasterChef and you've worked as a private chef, so you know a lot about cooking for others. What is one of your go-to recipes from the book, other than the sweet potato pie bars? What's something that will always be a hit when you're entertaining?
I feel like the turkey, sweet potato, and black bean soup is something that can please any palate. Turkey is a pretty popular protein right now. And so I think that is, kind of builds people's curiosity, like turkey in a soup. Okay. But also the lemon spaghetti with roasted shrimp. It is absolutely dreamy. And it is pretty simple to make, but it's kind of a showstopper. So I think it's great to fill people up because it's pasta, but it's also light and refreshing. But it's also kind of impressive.
Yeah, I think you said that's the one that you recommend as like a date night dish, or what to make when you want to make something to impress.
Yeah.
I know another recipe that I have personally made multiple times is the juiciest turkey burger you ever had. Truly one of the best.
Yes, that method is tried and true, going to get you a delicious, juicy turkey burger every time.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So in addition to being a chef and cookbook author, you are also active in a number of Indianapolis organizations, including Indie Women in Food. Do you want to speak a little bit just about some of the local projects you're involved with, some of the other things you're passionate about?
I would love to do that. Indie Women in Food is such a great networking organization for just women in all facets of the food industry, whether you are a cookbook author, food photographer, restaurant equipment owner, just everyone is there to support each other. It really is so great to have this sense of sisterhood here in the city, and especially in such a male-dominated industry. And Indie Women in Food is so great about connecting people, supporting each other. Just the other day I was looking for mason jars, and I can just drop in that group and say help, and people chime in. Also, I'm on the board. I'm the chair of diversity and inclusion for Slow Food Indie, and being able to help encourage food security and promote food access for underrepresented areas. Indianapolis is one of the largest food deserts in our country. And so to be a part of an organization that helps support children and people in need get good, wholesome, quality food, it really does just like, it's the pitter patters of my heart. I love being a part of that organization and supporting people. And Slow Food Indie is also supporting Staples Plus 5 by doing a live cooking demonstration for their members. So they're great to be a part of.
Oh, that is fantastic. And Staples Plus 5 is available now wherever books are sold. And it's just, it really is like a warm hug of a cookbook. So it was a pleasure to work with you on this book. And It's been a joy.
Thank you so much.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm Dan Zuccarello. I'm the executive food editor at America's Test Kitchen for Cookbooks.
My name's Sasha Madadian. I'm a senior editor on the book team and the project editor of the book we're going to talk about today. We have More Mediterranean with us today, which is kind of our follow-up to the Complete Mediterranean book, which is a Mediterranean book cookbook we did in 2017. And as the title implies, we're bringing more of that flavor. We found that there was a reason that book was so popular, which it was an incredibly popular book, was because, you know, in addition to just having really vibrant flavors that we maybe hadn't explored before, it just showed that eating the Mediterranean way isn't a diet. People think it is the most popular way to eat from a medical standpoint, but it's just not, it doesn't feel like a diet at all. It's not restrictive. It's very much a lifestyle. So we really wanted to hone in on that for the next book and kind of broaden what we thought about of the Mediterranean diet so that folks could, you know, continue to eat that way for life. So that's where we got with this book. And what really makes it different is it achieves three things. It's very much a plant forward book. You know, we learned from the first book that, you know, the Mediterranean isn't a monolith. There's different cuisines across the region, but what brings them together, whether it be for cultural or historical reasons, is just this emphasis on putting plants at the center of your plate. It's just natural there. And we wanted to, you know, plant-based eating is incredibly, you know, popular here now. And we wanted to bring that to the fore. So all of these recipes, whether they are recipes that have a little bit of meat or are vegetarian recipes, really celebrate the diversity of plants. Which brings me to the second point. We brought in the Mediterranean pantry in this book. We're not just maybe dealing with classical ingredients that are only found in the Mediterranean. You know, we live in a more global world and people eat this way anyways, but we wanted eating plant forward to be super accessible. So there are recipes that include, you know, avocados and salmon and things that are not maybe necessarily found in the Mediterranean, but that are in other people's pantries and they want to use it, and it's perfectly good and well to do so because they're so good for you. So we totally open the pantry and we have recipes that include, you know, any plant grain or lean protein that you can imagine, all while kind of grounded in these beautiful Mediterranean flavors. And finally, we just kind of brought in the scope. You know, the Mediterranean, like I said, it's a huge place and we wanted to explore all corners of it. We're both inspired by and using traditional recipes from every inch of the Mediterranean, from North Africa to the Middle East to the Western Mediterranean. So it's quite the collection, and it's a very colorful book of recipes.
You like what you said, you know, a lot of times with our books, you know, we're so focused on what our readership is interested in. And this topic really resonates, not just with our readership, but I think the larger readership of cookbooks in general. One of the things that really, you know, resonates with our readers is, you know, the convenience, the ease of recipes, which I think is something that we were very much focused, not only on kind of broadening the scope of the Mediterranean cuisine and kind of opening people's eyes to that, but also keeping it approachable, right? We don't want to scare people off. So
Absolutely.
when you go through our cookbook, you really see that, you know, a lot of the recipes, 45 minutes or less, certainly something that is really a big appeal to our readers. Convenient, keeping an eye towards the number of ingredients. One of the really nice things about Mediterranean cuisine, I think, is you can get a lot with a little bit of effort and not many ingredients, you know, really focusing on those fresh, bright flavors. That's kind of the hallmark of Mediterranean cuisine, and also just really great because it means you don't have a lot of ingredients you have to prep, right? Which is really great. I was thinking, you know, one example of that, one of the recipes that I really liked, we did this recipe for a lentil salad. And we cooked the lentils fresh because we know that, you know, part of you know, the style of Mediterranean cuisine is cooking a lot of, you know, fresh grains, fresh legumes. So we started by cooking some lentils, which is a really great base for any salad, really. But what I really liked about what we did was we brought in that fresh kind of flavor from the oranges, like I was talking about. There's celery that we added, which I thought was really cool. It's kind of crunchy. It's an interesting ingredient because most people just throw celery into their soup, right? But I like that we sliced it thin, kind of tossed that in. There was a little bit of salty tanginess from the feta cheese. But it's a really simple salad, so it hits all those points, right?
It's also versatile because you could have a bigger portion of that, and that's a meal. I mean, that's kind of a lot of what we focus on here is like legumes are a very adequate, complete protein, very good way to make a meal. Or you can just have a small amount and it's a side dish too if you want to have that chicken breast or something. So it's like also a very versatile recipe. There are a lot of those actually in the book.
Yeah, and like every recipe coming out of America's Test Kitchen, it's exhaustively tested. We tried canned beans, we tried all types of beans, really tried to make sure we had the right cooking time for the legumes, really thinking about the balances of flavors. How are we cutting everything? Are we writing the recipe as clear as possible? These are all things that we constantly think about when we're developing recipes. And not only are we thinking about those things in-house, we are sending our recipes out to the readership, asking for their feedback. We get a lot of really great responses. And that really is what helps us to continue to create these recipes that people can really rely on. One of the other recipes I was thinking about, just kind of thinking of these just really interesting ways to think about Mediterranean cuisine. So another one of my favorite recipes from the book is this phyllo tart that we made with eggplant and tomatoes. Really, I love rustic tarts. I think they're really easy to make. For anybody who's not familiar with a rustic tart, essentially you're starting with a round of dough and you put some filling in the center and then you just kind of like fold in the sides. I love it because it's a great pie, but you don't have to deal with all the crimping and the top. Right, exactly. That being said, tarts can still be a little, bit of a project for people. It can be a little intimidating. I like this recipe because we substitute the traditional pie crust with phyllo dough, which I think is a little bit easier to work with for someone who's just getting started because the sheets are already made, really readily available. The other things I really love about this recipe, the tomato and the eggplant, it's really interesting feeling for me for a rustic tart. And again, with that test kitchen know-how, we tried really hard to ensure the most crisp crust. And to do that, we salted the tomatoes a little bit to get rid of some of that moisture. We roasted the eggplant before baking the tart to kind of, again, draw off some moisture. A little bit of mozzarella sprinkled in between for some richness. Can't go wrong with that. But so delicious, and talk about a stunner.
Oh, beautiful. And with the salad, that's dinner. Yep. There are sheet pan recipes in this book. One that's super interesting is it's a plant forward dish. It's roasted cauliflower and eggplant that's roasted with a spice called baharat. It's a Middle Eastern 7 spice. And it's roasted with spices, and then you throw on chickpeas towards the end of the roasting time so they don't get all shriveled up and what have you. And you take your sheet pan out, and that's literally your meal. You put in a bowl, we serve it with a tahini sauce and with some, pita, you're done. We also have recipes that I think kind of get at how inspired we were just by the region. There's a butternut squash and apple pita bread salad. And the reason why I really like that, and it kind of points at this accessibility issue, is it's very much inspired by a Lebanese salad that folks might know, fattoush, which is a broken pita in a fresh cucumber, tomato, very garden fresh salad brought together with a lemony dressing. And this uses butternut squash and apple as the bulk of the vegetable matter. The butternut squash is roasted, so there's a cooked element. The apple stays like fresh and crisp. And we don't live in the Mediterranean. It's not as temperate. Tomatoes and cucumbers aren't delicious all year round. So you can really have this like texturally interesting, bright salad any time of year. Celebrate fall with different vegetables. Use what you have. So I think I've definitely been making that this fall, since those vegetables are in season.
It's a favorite of mine too. You were talking about the baharat, which one of the things that I really took away that thought was really special was this broadening of what we understood as spices from that region. One for me was the urfa chili, which is from Turkey. It's got this dried fruit. It's not very spicy, but man, we had some fun with it and just kind of tried to incorporate it into our daily cooking. And now I can't get enough of it, you know? And I think you'll see a lot through that book. Like you were saying, we just got really inspired, really excited. And I think it comes out a lot in the food that we presented in the book.
Yeah, I mean, there's also a feature in this book that I've been using just as principles of cooking since the book came out, which is, you know, showing there's a part of the introduction that shows you how to balance flavors. So maybe you don't want to follow one of the recipes in the book, but you're cooking some of your favorite dishes and want to incorporate, say, those spices that you've learned about, or different condiments, hot sauces, etc. You know, it just teaches you, you know, whether it be like sweet ingredients need some sort of heat to counterbalance them, and just general cooking principles that you could apply, you know, for life, which is really, you know, what we wanted to do with this book anyway, was make it, you know, very sustainable. So I've been having fun with different dressings and sauces and spices at home for sure.
It's the best. Well, you definitely got my mouth watering. I hope that we got your mouth watering. Again, more Mediterranean from America's Test Kitchen. You know, we hope that you enjoy it as much as we did making it. Thanks so much.
Enjoy. Thank you.